Okay, guys, we're going to get started. Good morning. Welcome to our 7th week of classes. We are at the halfway point, pretty much, for the semester. So we have finished the skeletal system. We are now going to be moving on and talking about our muscles. And after our muscles, we've got nervous, senses, endocrine, and the end. So we are rapidly coming to a close. Or at least over the hurdle. So for a lot of people, the muscle unit is one of their favorites. I hope it is true for you guys. We're going to start in the same way we did bones. We'll talk about the microanatomy first, so we'll zoom into our muscle tissue, and then we'll zoom out. I apologize for the lawnmower noises. I know it's raining, but my apartment complex has decided that now is still the perfect time to mow the grass in the rain. So we'll get through it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here for you guys. We're here in the class 6 agenda, or class 7 agenda. And again, today's class is going to focus on the main question of how do our skeletal muscles contract. And we're going to focus on skeletal muscles. Other muscles, so cardiac and smooth muscles, can contract in slightly different ways, but we're going to focus for this class on skeletal muscles. Okay, so before class, hopefully you watched those 3 videos and you did the first part of the case study. We're going to start with the class 7 attendance quiz. For this question, I want you guys to tell me, what are the 2 types of cytoskeleton in skeletal muscles that are involved with the sliding filament model? What are the 2 types of cytoskeleton in our skeletal muscle involved in the sliding filament model? So you're going to tell me the names of those 2 types of cytoskeleton. And for those of you just joining us, please put your name in the chat as your attendance record. Give everyone a minute or 2 to do that. Okay, what are the 2 types of cytoskeleton in our skeletal muscles involved in that sliding filament model? Okay, so let's talk about it again. So the 2 types of cytoskeleton are called actin and myosin. And the end result of skeletal muscle contraction is that the actin and myosin filaments are going to slide closer together. When our skeletal muscle is at rest, these filaments are further apart. And when the skeletal muscle contracts, these filaments slide closer together. So what we're going to do today is I'll put you guys into breakout rooms, and you're going to be working on the module 4 case study. So listen carefully, because we're going to do it in a slightly different order. So module 4 case study has several parts. You already did part 1, introducing you to the topic. For part 2, I want you to read through part 2, and then I want you to skip to question 4. So you're going to skip ahead to question 4, which asks you to think about the steps of muscle contraction and place them in the correct order, okay? And then I want you to do question 5, which is to tell me which steps require ATP and which require calcium. So you're going to put contraction steps in the right order, and you're going to think about which ones require ATP and which ones require calcium. And then when you finish with that, then I want you to go up and do questions 2 and 3. So you're going to start with question 4 and 5, and then when you're done, go up to 2 and 3. So if you scroll down the class 7 agenda page, you'll see 2 Google Docs. The first one is the steps that you need to unscramble, and the second one has your group's answer spot. So if you click on that first document, it brings you to the class 7 activity, and here you can see a whole bunch of steps that are for how a skeletal muscle contracts, A through Q. You're not going to write on this sheet, but you're going to look at it and look at all the different steps. And then working with your group, I want you to put them in the correct order. The second link is for this, which you'll write your breakout room number, and then as a group, you'll decide the order of the events. So do you think it goes A, B, C, or do you think it goes A, C, B, etc.? You're gonna put them in the order in which they occur, okay? So again, you're doing question 4 first, then question 5, and then if you have time, go back and do questions 2 and 3, okay? I'm gonna put you guys into groups. Does anyone have any questions about generally what you're doing? No, okay, awesome. Let me put you guys into 3 groups. Okay, so your breakout rooms are open. Please go and join that breakout room, and I'll pop around and make sure everyone knows what they're doing. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. Welcome, welcome. Our last few stragglers here. Okay. Okay. Welcome back. Okay, let's give everyone their last few seconds. And then we'll do our little review. Last few seconds. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. So that was meant to be a challenging activity. I know it was challenging for a lot of people because of the sheer number of steps. So let's talk about it. I'm going to see if I can do this on that little virtual whiteboard. We're just going to see how my drawing skills work out. I want to share with you guys let me put the chat up so I have it. Okay. I'm going to see if I can figure out drawing the steps, because I think honestly the best way to do this is to draw it out and to draw a picture. So we're going to start with, let me get a little drawing going. We're going to start by drawing a motor neuron. Now in science, the best way to draw things is to label your drawing. Okay, so we start with a motor neuron. Our motor neurons come out of our spinal cord. So when you want to contract your skeletal muscle, say, I want to pick up this pen, I'm going to think to myself, let's pick up the pen. And that's because our skeletal muscles, remember, are voluntary muscles. And so we're going to think, and that is going to travel down our spinal cord. And we'll talk more about the exact spinal cord to nerve situation when we talk about our nervous system in the next unit. But just know we start in the motor neuron. And so the first step, let me change this to a different color, is going to be to have that action potential come down our motor neuron. So the first step is that action potential is generated by the motor neuron, and it's going to reach the region called the axon terminal. And so this region down here is our axon terminal. Okay, so this whole little button that I am so good at drawing is our axon terminal. So we have our motor neuron ending in our axon terminal. And what that action potential is it is an electrical signal. An action potential is an electrical signal. And you don't need to know right now what the exact mechanism, the exact biology of the action potential in the motor neuron. We're going to just leave it very vague. And in the next unit, we'll spend a lot more time talking about it. So an action potential is generated by the motor neuron and it reaches the axon terminal. And what this electrical signal does is it opens up these, let me make it green. Why? I don't know. Let me make it green. Oh, hold on. You know, I'm being particular. Okay. It opens up a voltage-gated calcium channel. A voltage-gated calcium channel. And calcium is going to come in to our neuron. Calcium is going to come in to the neuron. Okay, so calcium is an ion, and again, that action potential is an electrical signal. So that electrical signal is going to open up these calcium channels, allowing calcium to come into the neuron. And what the calcium does is it causes the release of all of these vesicles that are full of acetylcholine to be released. Okay, the acetylcholine is going to be released, and we're going to release all of these little bundles of acetylcholine. Now we have acetylcholine flooding around in the synaptic cleft. Okay, and let me label that. I'm such a good drawer. Acetylcholine is often abbreviated ACH. Okay, so the action potential comes down our motor neuron. It reaches the axon terminal. It opens up voltage-gated calcium channels. Calcium enters the neuron axon terminal and causes the release of synaptic vesicles full of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is then going to cross this area called the synapse. And acetylcholine is going to bind to its receptors on the muscle cell. And here we give the plasma membrane of the muscle cell a special name. We call it the sarcolemma. So acetylcholine is going to bind to its receptors. I'm going to draw the receptors again as a square. So it's going to bind to its receptors. Now we need to talk about another ion. So when acetylcholine binds to its receptors, we're going to have another ion enter the muscle cell. So what the acetylcholine does is it opens up these cation channels, and sodium rushes in. Sodium, remember, is a cation meaning a positively charged ion. And so sodium is going to come in. Sodium will enter the muscle fiber, the muscle cell. Fiber and cell are synonyms, okay? So sodium comes in, and this causes a depolarization. And this causes a depolarization because all of a sudden, we have a bunch of positive charges entering. There's a bunch of positive charge, and this is our depolarization. Depolarization is a burst of positive charge inside the cell. The cell is normally negative, sodium is positive, sodium brings with it that positive charge, we get a depolarization. And that local depolarization will lead to an action potential, or an electrical signal in our muscle fiber, okay? Now, the muscle fiber has a unique structure called a T-tubule, which is just kind of a bending in of the sarcolemma. And what happens is that action potential is going to travel along the plasma membrane and down the T-tubule, okay? So the action potential generated will travel down the T-tubule, and it will get near another structure that we have inside of our muscle cell called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, okay? And it will get near the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, let me put a little text box here, sarcoplasmic reticulum. And what will happen is that action potential will open up calcium channels in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and calcium will flood the muscle cell. Calcium is going to flood the muscle cell. So now we have all of this calcium flooding our muscle cell. And what the calcium does is it will allow for the sliding of our cytoskeletal filaments. And let me draw here. The last little drawing we're going to do is the sarcomere. So in our muscle cell, we have thin filaments of actin, okay? Let me label that. We have our thin actin filaments, and we also have thick filaments that are called myosin. Now, let me do that in blue in the middle. So we have these thick myosin filaments. If I could draw a straight line, that would be ideal. Okay, we have our thick myosin filaments. And what myosin wants to do is it wants to grab onto the actin and pull it to the center. However, it's normally blocked. Actin is blocked normally, But what calcium does is calcium is going to release the block on actin. So calcium is going to release the block on actin and allow myosin to grab a hold and pull it to the center. So we're going to pull the actin filaments into the middle, okay? So calcium will release the block on actin, myosin will grab onto actin, and our muscle will contract as these filaments slide over each other. Now, the calcium will eventually be put back into our sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the myosin will have to let go of actin. And this is where ATP comes into play, because ATP is required for the myosin to let go of actin. ATP is required for myosin to let go of actin. Now, when our muscle is contracting in a steady contraction, so you are lifting weights and you're holding on to a contraction, a serious contraction, then the myosin is going to have to grab onto actin, pull it, and then let go, and do that over and over again. In the same way, if you were pulling in a boat using a rope, for example, you would have to pull on that rope multiple times. The same is true for myosin. So it's going to grab onto the actin and pull it to the center multiple times. And every time it lets go, it's going to need ATP. Okay, so let's think about this in a bigger picture. We're going to need calcium. Calcium is required for acetylcholine to be released in our motor neuron. Calcium is required to release the block on actin. We're going to need ATP. ATP is required for myosin to release actin. We're going to need sodium, right? Sodium is involved with that depolarization, with the action potential in our muscle cell. So we need several different elements here for our muscles to contract. Okay, I am going to save this beautiful drawing and I'll post it. I don't know how helpful it is, but hopefully it's somewhat helpful. Okay, I'm going to put up a little poll on the side. If you guys could answer that, it's how do you feel right now about muscle contraction? I understand the process well, I understand it, but I still have questions, or I am totally lost. I didn't understand a word that you just said. If you guys could answer that for me, that would be great. Okay. So most people seem to be falling in the, I understand it, but I still have some questions. So the best way to do that is to watch those videos again. So I posted those videos for the pre-assignment. They go through the muscle contraction. And what you want to do when you watch a video like that is pause it and see if you can predict the next step, right? See if you can predict what's going to happen or what's supposed to happen. If you can, awesome. If you can't, watch it through again, read through the steps again, read through the book again. If you are still totally lost, please email me and set up a time that we can WebEx and we can go through it again, because this is a process. If I was a gambling person, which I'm not, I don't believe in gambling, but if I was gambling, I would predict to see a question asking me to describe the steps of a muscle contraction on the muscle quiz as a short answer, for example. So you really want to make sure that you understand the steps here. Okay, the rest of the case study talked about malignant hyperthemia, which is a very rare genetic disorder, and it's an adverse reaction to anesthesia. And what happens in malignant hyperthemia is there's an over response to muscle contraction. The muscles contract too much and the muscle cells can be destroyed, and they can release all of these ATP and the calcium and the sodium, those ions that we talked about, will be released into the body, and they can have adverse effects on other organs. And that's what they call that veritable metabolic storm. So all of those adverse effects that come from an over contraction of muscles. And how they treat this is actually by giving a calcium channel blocker. So we talked about what calcium does in our muscles, right? Calcium is responsible for releasing the block on actin. So by blocking those calcium channels, they're able to stop skeletal muscles from contracting. And that's if they can catch this quickly enough. Okay, I'm going to show you one last thing, and then you guys will be good to go. So let's walk back to our Google Doc here, right? So we're in our Class 7 agenda. I just want to show you where to put what you've been working on. So a few reminders about where we are going. We are here in Module 4, the muscle system, right? So Class 7 agenda, that's what we just worked on. On the Class 7 assignment, submit whatever you guys worked on for the case study, any answers you had to the questions in part 2. If you didn't get to it, just put what you guys, a screenshot from the Google Doc for your group's answers. That's also fine. Keep in mind that due Sunday are the guided reading questions. For the muscle unit, I switched up the order a little bit because I feel like people were putting things off kind of to the last minute. So now the guided reading questions are due a week before the homework. So you have guided reading questions. And then you also have project members for your final projects. You need to have a group. If you do not form a group, I will randomly assign you to whoever is left. So please talk with people. I made at the bottom, I made a little discussion board. If you still do not have a group, to post in there, see who else doesn't have a group, and hopefully you guys can work that out. Okay, I will stick around if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, you are good to go, and I will see you next week.